This is Craigmillar Castle, just outside Edinburgh. Everyone goes to Edinburgh Castle, bang in the middle of the city, but this one just might be a bit more interesting. It's had one or two famous guests over the years, and supposedly it's where they planned a notorious murder. It's one of the best preserved castles in Scotland, but it wasn't always in Edinburgh. The city has obviously grown from its medieval roots and sucked up more and more land over time. Although in this case, the castle park has held it off pretty well. The original bit is the tower house at the centre. That was probably built in around the late 14th or early 15th century. The walls are 3 metres thick and 17 metres tall, built for a purpose. There's a courtyard wall added in the late 1400s, and the west range dates back to sometime around the 1660s. It was a rural retreat just outside the city, and it still has the remains of gardens, and behind me a fish pond that's actually a scheduled monument. It's a bit of a rabbit warren. You could spend hours just walking around the different levels and passageways and staircases. The land round here was owned by the Preston family from 1374, and architectural historians think they may have started work on the castle sometime soon after. But the castle was inhabited for 300 years, which makes it a bit difficult to date. Like all houses, it's evolved with changing use. It has some interesting history. In 1479, John Stuart, Earl of Mar and brother of James III, was imprisoned here for witchcraft against the king. It wasn't long before he died in suspicious circumstances. In 1544, the Earl of Hereford tried to capture it for Henry VIII during a period known as the Rough Wooing. Henry had proposed a marriage between his son Edward and Mary, Queen of Scots, who was at the time about 6 months old. The plan was that she would move down to England so that her upbringing could be overseen. But the Scottish nobles changed their minds at the last minute for purely selfish motives and decided on a renewed alliance with France. Henry wasn't amused and tried to make them change their minds by wreaking as much havoc and mayhem as possible. It didn't work, but the castle was burned and had to be repaired, and Mary would go on to become its most famous inhabitant. In late November 1566, recovering from an illness and possibly suffering from depression, Mary stayed in the castle. This is Queen Mary's room, although it's debatable whether she actually stayed here. It's possible she stayed in more expansive apartments in the East Range. We do know she stayed in the castle though, unlike most places she supposedly stayed. Mary had just given birth to the future James VI and was keeping well and truly out of the way. On the night of the 9th of March, her husband, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, had led a group of nobles into the room where she was dining in Holyrood Palace. There, they'd murdered her personal secretary and favourite, David Rizzio, right in front of her. Simon Preston, the then owner of the castle, was a loyal supporter, and it's said this is where the Craigmillar Bond, a plot to murder the Queen's husband, came together. On the 10th of February 1567, Darnley was supposed to stay here, but decided instead to go to Kirkfield, which is now underneath Edinburgh University's old college. He was smothered, and then the house he was staying in was blown up. He was found in a field nearby. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Simon Preston didn't stay loyal for long though. He jailed Mary in his townhouse before she was taken to Lochleven Castle, where she was imprisoned. None of that deterred her son, James, from coming here in 1589 while he waited around for his bride, Anne of Denmark, to arrive. In the end, he gave up and sailed to meet her in Norway, but wound up in a storm that led to paranoia and the greatest witch hunt of all time. There does seem to be a recurring theme with the Stuarts and witches. In the 17th century, the lands and the castle were sold to Sir John Gilmours, Lord President of the Court of Session, a literal bigwig. He did more remodelling, but by the 18th century it was abandoned, and by 1789 the roofs were missing from some of the buildings. The castle was left standing as a sort of romantic feature, a ruin in the wider estate grounds. It was an attraction for tourists and artists who were inspired to come here and paint. In 1813, an upright skeleton was found in one of the cellars, which really only added to its attraction, and by 1842 there was a plan to renovate it for Queen Victoria. But that came to nothing. She did visit in 1886, and there was a lot of restoration work carried out, but it was never lived in again. Eventually, it fell into the care of the state, and now it's owned and run by Historic Scotland, who are, as you can see, working on it now. If you're in Edinburgh and you're a tourist, or you live here, it's well worth a look. The views are amazing, even if they do kind of push the boundaries on my fear of heights just a bit. See you next time.